Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the movement of refugees around the world, or alleged refugees, and pretty much every media piece I see that heavily promotes and pushes mass migration, because I mean all the media stations, or pretty much all of them, are 95% of them are controlled by the globalists, and their script that they're told to read is that mass migration is a good thing. It's going to happen. Nothing you can damn well do about it. And if you don't like it, you're a Nazi, fascist, racist. So you know that's the structure of the information flow that we give in the propaganda. But there's a conflation between refugees and economic migrants. And if you look at pretty much any news announcement or any mention of it, assuming they do, they put the two together. So the refugee, they're talking refugees, they're desperate, they're poor, they're being badly mistreated, they're on the run, their lives are in danger, so on and so forth. And then they switch during sort of mid-sentence and saying they have the right to a better life. I don't know where that right comes from. I like to know, is it a right to live in a rich country, for example? I didn't know that it was. But why isn't it a right to live in a poor country? Anyway, they conflate the two, that refugees are economic migrants in effect, and everyone or anyone that declares themselves as a refugee can ask for asylum, but they're an economic migrant at the same time. Now we need to just look at this. Refugees, I get, and there are allegedly over 60 million refugees around the world, and this can be people that have who are say fleeing civil war or famine or say huge natural disasters like maybe a massive earthquake or something like that. So there are these sorts of things, or say in the case of Venezuela, where failed government policies have meant that there just isn't enough resources to go around. The people are doing it tough, and so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, are leaving Venezuela to go somewhere else. So I do get it that refugees, a situation that creates refugees can occur, and I don't think anyone disputes that. Now, whether or not they have the right to go to a first world country, that's sort of, or whether they should be welcomed into a first world country, that's really the issue here. Now, according to the various United Nations conventions, if you're claiming a refugee and thus to be a refugee, thus asylum in another country, you have to go to the first country where next or the nearest one that borders or is nearest to your own country. Now, most of these so-called refugees are travelling through 17 or 20 countries to get to a Western country. So they're clearly not refugees. But then the mainstream media switches around and says, oh, they're economic migrants. They only want a better life. What's wrong with that? They've got a right to that. Who wouldn't want a better life? And I do understand that. But we need to look at the wider architecture of this. They're not getting to the West themselves. They're not, some peasant villager that is illiterate in their own language isn't deciding, you know what, I think I'll go to England because of they're not doing that. There's NGOs, activist NGOs, the George Soros funded, United Nations funded, a whole array of activist NGOs, and they're going to these peasants and saying, hey, guess what? You can go to a first world country, and you know what? We'll help you get there. And so these people are being provided with not only, juiced up and ginned up and stirred up to go, but they're promised help on all the way. They're bussed here to there. They're given boats to go somewhere. They're given food and clothing and water and shelter. There's an entire logistical machine that makes it possible. Now, without that encouragement by the NGO agitators and stirrers, and without the logistical machine, you won't get nowhere near the amount of people attempting it, if any. You'd get the odd straggler here and there, perhaps. But most of them would just go to the nearest camp where the United Nations had some NGO in conjunction with the United Nations had shelter like tents and food and water and so on, and they would stay there until the danger had passed. Bear in mind that they're coming off a subsistence existence where they barely manage to get by each day. And they go to a camp where they're being fed, given medical care and water and so on, and they don't have to live an uncertain existence in the sense of food supply. So they're being looked after. It's a good deal. It's a good deal. It's a better. They're living a better lifestyle than they had previously as subsistence farmers in some third world shithole. If in a United Nations camp, they have got a higher standard of living. They've got a reliable, regular food supply, and as I mentioned, medical care and so on. And the NGOs and the Doctors Without Borders and that sort of thing. They're doing all sorts of operations. You're removing cataract. They're doing all sorts of things for these people they otherwise just simply wouldn't have access to. So it's a good deal to stay in these camps. But when they're in these camps, that's when the NGO agitators get to them and say, hey, guess what? You can go to a first world country. And they're regaled with all sorts of stories like, those white countries are rich because they stole everything from you. That's right, you. Why are you a dirt poor subsistence farmer? Nothing to do with the fact that you're a IQ 80 lazy peasant or something. Nothing to do with that. It's Whitey stole it off you. You go to England or France or something, and you just take back the money that they stole from you. And these simple people, their heads are filled with this bullshit, and so they go thinking that not only it's their right, but it's an entitlement to go to a first world country and get all the free stuff, and that's why they're going, the free stuff. But again, they're being helped all along the way. Now, sure, everybody wants to, the IQ 80 peasant goes, you mean they give me a free house, I go to school, and if I go to school, I become rich, I go to school. They're so simple, they have no idea how it all works. And so when they get to the Western countries, sure, they get the handouts and they're entitled, they enjoy it. But at some point, there's an element of reality comes in and they think, holy guacamole, I actually was happier back in my village as a subsistence peasant. Now, the other side of it, if they want a better life. Now, I do understand a refugee, say, who is genuinely a doctor or an engineer, not the fictitious ones the mainstream media make up, but a real doctor or an engineer in a third world country or a country that's, say, gone into civil war, and they want to come to the West. That's acceptable, but there's a tiny proportion of those, and most of those, not all, but most of them stay. The ones that do go, maybe they do get to the West, but they're the sort of people that are genuine economic refugee migrants. They've got something to offer. For the vast majority of the people that are coming across, they're not the doctors and the engineers. They're dirt poor, low IQ, illiterate peasants who maybe have 2 years schooling at some bush, school out in the sticks somewhere. They're not adding any value to anything, nor will they. They don't give anything to the economies. So they should stay in the refugee camps. Now if the various Western governments want to trawl through the refugee camps, finding the doctors and the engineers, I've got no problem with that, assuming the credentials are recognised and that sort of thing. And it'd be worth paying and subsidising, assuming again that they have those credentials. They're paying and subsidising those people to come to the West. I get that, and they would be the genuine economic migrant refugees that the West could need. For the rest of them, though. What benefit is there in allowing millions upon millions of illiterate third world peasants coming into the West? There's none. But that's what the machinery and the apparatus and the infrastructure is doing. And so these people are not refugees, because they're not stopping at the nearest safe haven. And they're not economic migrants in the sense that they've got skills to offer and to sell. They're just nothing but a dead weight on the West. And why Western governments are bringing them in and accepting them in because the globalists are telling them that's what they have to do. And Western governments are no longer sovereign, but these are the ones that are not needed, and the laws that exist on the books in Western nations need to be enforced. And these people, no, you go back to the NGOs that are stirring them up and agitating, providing the infrastructure, need to be fined and dragged through the courts until their tax exempt status needs to be taken away to stop them from doing this. And then these alleged refugees need to be sent straight back to the refugee camp where they came from, and then they can go back to their villages when the Civil War or the famine or whatever it was that caused them to move has subsided, and then they can go back to the village with all the people they know, all their relatives and their friends and so on. So that's the way it should be. But don't allow this false equation and conflation here between refugees and economic migrant that has a right, an entitlement to a better life at the expense of the Western taxpayer. That is bullshit, and push back against it. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.